World War II is over. The Second World War ended 78 years ago, but what if it didn't? What if the Axis powers had defeated the Allies? Would there be a chance for the Germans to rule the world? How would the Japanese Empire look today if they had beaten the USA? What would Russia look like if Italy was the winner of the war? Today, we will try to answer these questions by imagining a world where the Axis powers have won. Let's go back to 1945 and change history together. Over the course of 1943, the tide of the war began to turn against the Axis powers. In February, the German army under Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus was utterly defeated at the Battle of Casablanca Pass in northern Africa. This defeat resulted in the loss of over 100,000 men and forced the entire German Afrika Korps to retreat. Soon after, in May, the British launched an offensive that drove the Germans out of Tunis and forced them to surrender. With the loss of Africa, Germany lost their key resource of oil and became completely dependent on shipments from their allies in the south. This left the German economy in shambles and also allowed the British to regroup and prepare themselves for an invasion of Europe. In December 1943, the Red Army under the command of Joseph Stalin began their own push towards Germany. Known as Operation Bagration, this offensive would result in the near-total destruction of the German army and would lead to the liberation of Eastern Europe. However, due to the lack of resources and political conflicts with Japan, Germany's situation remained grim and their fate was still far from decided. As the Soviets pushed further and further west, the Polish resistance rose up and fought against the occupier. By April 1945, the Red Army was less than 100 kilometers from Berlin when suddenly the Germans surrendered. Over the next few months, the Soviets occupied all of Germany and divided it among themselves, France, Britain, and the United States. Seeing the power of the Red Army firsthand, the Polish leadership decided to cooperate with the Soviets rather than risk another occupation. They even agreed to install a communist government in exchange for autonomy within the Soviet Union. This satisfied Stalin, and he allowed Poland to exist as a sovereign nation once again. He also agreed to return the territories lost in the first partition of Poland in 1939, giving them control over the Baltic states. But the situation in the east was not so peaceful. The Soviets pushed into Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary, crushing any remaining resistance and establishing communist governments in their place. Meanwhile, the British and French were advancing through Italy and Austria from the west. And by the end of April, the Allies had closed in on Berlin. Hitler knew that his time was running out, and so he ordered the construction of a massive defense line around the city. But it was too late. On May, the Red Army stormed Berlin and captured the city. The following day, Hitler committed suicide, and Germany surrendered unconditionally. This alternate timeline follows the same path until the end of the war in Europe. But now, let's see how this changes the outcome of the war in Asia and the Pacific. In our timeline, in August of 1945, after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan surrendered, thus ending World War II. But what if Japan had not surrendered? Without the two atomic bombs, Japan would have continued fighting. With the support of the German U-boat fleet, Japan could have maintained its resistance against the US, and perhaps even secured a victory which would have demoralized the Americans. The US would have been forced to invade mainland Japan, a costly and lengthy process that could have dragged on for years. A protracted conflict could have ended in a stalemate, leading to a ceasefire and Japan retaining some of its territorial gains. But without the Soviet intervention in Manchuria, Japan could have consolidated its control over the region and potentially expanded further into Siberia and Alaska. In this alternate timeline, the Japanese are victorious in the Pacific and establish a vast empire across East Asia and Oceania. The Japanese Emperor Hirohito is proclaimed the new ruler of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, controlling vast amounts of raw materials and cheap labor from its colonies. Under the rule of the Shinto military aristocracy, the Japanese economy begins to boom, while the rest of the world suffers from the aftermath of the war. The United States, devastated by the prolonged conflict with Japan, becomes increasingly isolated on the world stage. As tensions rise between the victorious Central Powers and the U.S. in the Pacific, the Chinese nationalists take advantage of the chaos in China and declare the end of the Qing dynasty. Sun Yat-sen is elected as the new leader of China and establishes a new government in Nanjing. Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government quickly begins to modernize and industrialize China, turning it into a major power in East Asia. In Europe, the war has come to an end, but the victors are not celebrating. The Germans and Italians are bitter about being denied a chance at total victory. Each side blames the other for their missed opportunity, and this rivalry grows stronger every day. The three Central Powers begin an intense period of rearmament, preparing for a new conflict with the Western powers. The Soviet Union sees this as a threat to their security, and so they strengthen their ties with France, Britain, and America. Tensions rise across Europe as both sides race to build up their militaries. The Italian leadership, led by Mussolini, feels that they deserve more from the peace treaty. Although victorious, their gains in the East are minimal compared to what they had hoped for. Mussolini believes that he can still achieve more, and so he begins to stir up nationalist sentiment across Italy. He makes claims to territories that are outside of Italy's borders, including parts of Austria, Greece, and North Africa. The Italian people, fueled by propaganda, are eager to go to war again, and many support Mussolini's expansionist goals. Meanwhile, the Germans are licking their wounds and planning for the future under the leadership of a new chancellor, Joseph Goebbels. Despite their defeat in the war, the Nazi Party remains popular in Germany, and Goebbels wants to use this support to gain power. He plans to exploit any instability in Europe to seize control and make Germany great again. In Russia, Joseph Stalin is facing a different set of problems. The Red Army has just returned home after years of fighting, but they are exhausted and demoralized. Many of them want to return to their families and rebuild their lives. But Stalin needs these soldiers to maintain control over Eastern Europe. He refuses to demobilize the army and instead forces them to stay in the military. This causes discontent among the soldiers who begin to plan a rebellion against their government. In this alternate timeline, the Soviet Union finds itself on the brink of collapse as internal tensions rise. Now, let's imagine that Mussolini declares war on Yugoslavia and the British. His goal is to capture the Balkans and create a new Roman Empire. But Mussolini's army is no match for the combined forces of the British and Yugoslavs. They are defeated and forced to retreat back to Italy. Humiliated by the defeat, Mussolini resigns and is replaced by a new Italian leader, a former general, Juan Battista. Battista's first order is to disarm and disband Mussolini's black-shirt militia, angering many of the Italian fascists. However, Battista knows that he cannot rely on the support of the military or the people. If he wants to make Italy great, he must do something that no Italian leader has ever done before. So he reaches out to the Americans and asks for their help in rebuilding Italy. This deal gives the Americans access to Italian markets and resources in exchange for aid and investment. The Germans, seeing this as a threat to their influence in Europe, begin to build up their army once again. Tensions rise, and soon the Germans invade Belgium and France. But before they can make any significant gains, they are attacked from behind by the Soviets. Caught off guard, the Germans are pushed back and forced to retreat. As the Soviets advance further into Germany, they are met with little resistance. The German people are tired of war, and most of the military leaders have already fled to safety. Within weeks, the Soviets had taken control of all of Germany and established a communist government. In this alternate timeline, the Germans are crushed between the Soviets and the Western powers, losing all of their territory and being forced to pay heavy reparations. Meanwhile, Japan is in chaos as the emperor is forced to abdicate and a new government is established. The Japanese people are angry over the loss of their empire, and many believe that the emperor should have stayed in power. However, the new leaders know that Japan cannot afford another war. They begin to rebuild the country and seek closer ties with the United States. Over the next few years, the world begins to recover from the devastation of the war. The Americans and Russians help to rebuild Western Germany and Japan, while the Soviets occupy Eastern Germany, Poland, and Romania. Tensions remain high between the superpowers, but no one wants to repeat the mistakes of the past. The world enters a new era of peace and prosperity, but it is a fragile peace that could easily be broken. As we have seen, the outcome of World War II could have been very different. If the Axis powers had won, it is possible that the world we live in today would be unrecognizable. It is a testament to the courage and sacrifice of those who fought in the war that we were able to avoid such a fate. Thank you for watching.